All right, welcome in everybody to Destination Show episode 12. Here, as always, JD Cameron with my guy Jeremy Nygaard. Jeremy, what's up, man? How are you?
I'm great. The Wolves are getting it done for Minnesota sports,
That's right.
and it's fun to talk baseball on a Wednesday night.
Yes, sir. So excited to dig into a busy episode today. We're going to be covering forthcoming 40-man roster additions and specifically protecting guys from the Rule 5 draft. But we'll get into that in a few minutes. But want to dig in some kind of news and notes first. As of the end of recording last week, man, we are officially in the off season. It's off season. Are you an off season guy? Do you like reckless trade speculation, free agency, people getting preemptively irate about payroll situations? What's your take on all this stuff, man?
All of those things. I love all of those things. And the reason I think I would say I'm an in-season guy more than I'm an off-season guy.
Yeah.
But the part about the off-season that I really enjoy is that there's no like you never know when it's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
You know when the Twins are going to play a ball game, or the Brewers or the Cubs, and you kind of have an idea when they're going to make roster moves before or after the game. Then it's trade deadline season. You know when the trades are going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But during the off season, anything can happen at literally any time, right? Carlos Correa signs. It's announced at like midnight as I'm walking
Yep.
down the stairs after a late night at a graduation party or
Yep.
it was a party. I don't remember what it was, but I'm like, oh, this happened. And then I get to see when everybody's waking up the next day,
Yep.
right? And I remember when Torrey Hunter got signed, and I was like laying on the floor with one of my kids, and it's like, oh, that just happened. And then it's
Yep.
like you had to boom, 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 run down the stairs and try to figure out what's going on. Um, that's what I enjoy about the off season because it's like you never know when is it going to happen. Now, maybe it was a birthday party. I don't know. Theo's like graduation party in January. No, it wasn't. It was some party that we were at, and was it in January? Because I was thinking I was watching an NCAA tournament game. Or was I watching just a random Badgers game? Oh yeah, I'm talking first Carlos Correa signing. I think it was after the Badgers lost to like somebody or maybe beat somebody in the NCAA tournament. We were driving back. Anyway, I'm an off-season guy. Are you an off-season guy?
Um, I am in small doses, right? So like I want what is never going to happen, which is news to be in like small, steady um increments. And I'm already over everyone preemptively complaining about the drop in Twins payroll that we knew was coming, that we actually like have no idea what it's going to be yet. So like I agree that is potentially not great news, but why don't we just wait a little
Right.
while longer before we get ready to, scream into the void constantly for 3 months? So, yes, I agree with you. The highs are high. I don't like the slow parts in between. I do remember that first Correa signing too, because I ended up writing it up for Twins Daily at like 3 a.m. Uh, it was crazy. I
Yeah, it was
That
fun.
was definitely top of my like things I did not expect list in recent memory. I think. Speaking of unexpected things, I do feel like we got to cover this, man. Uh, so this news is now a couple of days old, but wild bombshell. Craig Counsell out of seemingly nowhere. The question was, is he going to stay with the Brewers? Is he maybe going to go to the Mets or one of the other interested teams? Is hired by the Cubs for $40 million over 5 years, potentially the best manager in the game, hired to a division rival, game setting contract for a manager that puts him up there with the highest paid managers and head coaches in all of North American sports. Jeremy, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, it was interesting. I thought for sure he was leaving the Brewers. I've
For
said
sure.
that a number of
Agree.
times. I thought for sure he was going to end up with the Mets. Um, And so I happened to be busy at school doing stuff, and one of my coworkers is like, he's a Brewers fan, and it's like, run into the cafeteria where I was busy doing things, and he's like, Counsell's leaving the Brewers. And I'm like, what? I'm like, I knew he was going to leave the Brewers. Like, no, but he's actually leaving. And then he like had to run back to his class, or I don't know what was going on. And so I hadn't checked anything. I hadn't been on Twitter. I hadn't been really privy to anything that was going on. And like pulled out my phone, and it's like hired to a place that had already had a manager.
Yeah, that was crazy. Without knowing
like,
who it was.
Whoa, that's nuts, because it's like everybody's fan base at that point is like,
yep.
Could it be our team? Except for those that needed a manager, right? That's what made that crazy. And then I got the alert, I think from ESPN or wherever, that he had jumped ship to the Cubs, which I guess shocking in that they had a manager, right? But everything that you hear about Counsell and why he liked being in the area kind of still is true, because Chicago and Milwaukee, I mean, that's just down the road.
Yep.
So everything about Milwaukee works in Chicago, just on a bigger scale with a bigger paycheck. And good for him, because I've said it, underappreciated by the Brewers fans.
I agree.
But going to be under this really, really bright light and microscope that is Chicago.
How are you feeling if you're a Brewers fan, knowing that, I don't know, maybe it's a case of don't know what you got till it's gone, but I've seen a lot of interesting reactions from Brewers fans and folks online. How would you be feeling now if you were in that seat of like intense Milwaukee Brewer fandom?
I mean, I would probably be. It depends how my level of understanding and fandom is, right? So if I was the Brewers fan here saying what I've been saying the whole time, Craig Counsell's underappreciated, and he leaves to go to the Chicago, I would be like, well, good for him. I would be a little irritated in that he did it, but good for him in that he did. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so if I was like a casual fan and didn't understand the whole logistics of having your manager be a lame duck manager, which should never happen, right? You either extend him or you fire him, but you don't let him get into his last year of his contract. As far as I know, how many managers are ever in their last years of their contract? Is it ever? Does it ever happen? Yeah. I mean, it's like Theo says here, it's very rare. And that's why it's like Baldelli gets an extension. It's like, why are you extending him? You're just not going to let a guy get into his last year, because it makes this whole season, what happened with the Brewers, uncomfortable.
Poor business.
And so that part of things, like if I didn't understand it, yeah, it would be irritating. But because of, I guess, how I just relate with those things, good for him. If you're a Brewers fan and you're mad about it, it's because you don't understand the business of things, which I don't have a personal beef with you for not understanding the business part of things, but that's why this happened. And good for him for going and making money, doing what he's good at.
I would be mad at my organization if I was a Brewers fan, though. And here's why. I think that the Brewers are, right, like a smaller market team than the Twins, right? And the way that we have seen the Twins org progress in the last 5 years, from not being very good to should dominate this division for the next several years, has been upgrading and gaining edges around the margins. And in the case of Counsell, if it's not paying him an additional $3 million a year to keep him in Milwaukee, if he wanted to kind of change the game as far as manager salaries goes, that's super depressing for me as a Brewers fan, because the edges are where we gain our advantages over bigger markets anyway. And Counsell was an edge, and who knows, maybe they find a seamless internal fit, but that edge is gone. And I would feel pretty disappointed, and I think Brewers fans have every right to feel pretty disappointed with the leadership of the organization for allowing that to happen.
Yeah, that's fair. But I don't think the casual fan will direct that anger at the right people.
For sure. For sure.
And that's going to be the problem. And they're going to hate Counsell. And that's a big rivalry already,
It's going to
which
be great.
makes it even more fun for all of Major League
It's going to be
Baseball.
awesome. I can't wait.
Sure. For sure.
Last piece of news we got to mention before we dig into all things 40-man roster. AFL home run derby. Don't suppose you happen to peep who brought home the crown or the chain for the AFL home run derby?
Well, I mean, I saw who won, and it wasn't Emmanuel Rodriguez.
Any opportunity.
Yeah, whenever I can.
Kalai Rosario bringing home the crown for the AFL home run derby. It's funny that you bring up Erod. I kind of hoped you would, because there's so many similarities in their profiles. And we haven't talked much about Rosario. I even remember kind of previewing the AFL. We focused on other guys just because it seemed like he was the obvious guy from the Twins org to focus on. What are your thoughts on him going into 2024? Optimistic, like wait and see, or yeah, I guess like buy or sell on Kalai Rosario for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd probably be more on the hold.
Yeah.
Cautiously optimistic, and let's see how he does, because he's going to have to make the jump to Double A, right? I mean, you assume he'd have to. And he was really, really good in the Midwest League and not really old for that age. So I'm cautiously optimistic that he can have a repeat. But when you have a guy that just makes that jump, you wonder if it's going to be something he can hold on to. I think he's solidified himself at least in the, or put himself on the radar for the Twins. Not, I don't think they're looking at it and saying he's going to be a guy like you're saying about Walker Jenkins, right?
Yep.
But I think he's in that next tier where it's like, hey, if we can get a couple of these guys that can hit, that makes the transition from, Kepler being a free agent after this year, if he's still on the team, right? How what's the leash on Larnick? Does Kirilloff in the outfield? Are there any of these other guys, like we'll talk about maybe a little bit later? What's the timeline on Rodriguez? Like, he fits into that conversation. And I think if you can work yourself into that area as a prospect, you've done yourself a good thing, and he has. So kudos to him. Great for him, and good for the Twins organization.
For sure. And a couple of quick notes on Rosario, right? Because I think we can say, like, friend of the show, Carlos Galazo, answered a question about him on his podcast, Future Projection, which I would encourage folks to check out. It's really good. Just around Rosario, and you brought up Erod because you take every opportunity to bring up your favorite Twins prospect, and the profiles are remarkably similar between Rosario and Erod, I think, right? So Rosario in 2023, you mentioned he spent the whole season at Cedar Rapids. K percentage of 29%. That's really high, but walking 14% of the time. Average exit velocity around 90 miles an hour, 107 mile per hour, 90th percentile exit velocity. That's really, really good. Solid chase rate. But similar to Erod, the question I think going forwards is going to be, what does the swing and miss look like? And the contact percentage was 66% in 2023, and pretty similar to Erod's number. That's a one to monitor. And so I think they're similar in that for both of those guys, you have kind of 2 out of 3 of the offensive skill sets in place. Both have power, both make great swing decisions, and the bat to ball skills is going to be the thing to monitor. So I'm really curious for Rosario now, also co-leading the AFL in home runs. 2024 should be a big season for him, so looking forward to it. All right, let's dig into what we're going to focus on today. We're going to talk Rule 5 draft and 40-man roster decisions. We're at a nice point of the kind of baseball calendar here where free agency hasn't really kicked off. Teams are making decisions about which organizational prospects to add to their 40-man rosters. And before we kind of talk org-specific guys, because we'll do that for the Brewers, Cubs, and Twins. I feel like some level setting and context setting might be helpful here. So, Jeremy, can you tell us like a little bit about the Rule 5 draft? Like, what is it? Why is it a thing? How does it work? Just some of the basics before we get into specific dudes.
Yeah, I feel like I could probably talk about this for a whole episode. So I'm going to try to give it the Cliff Notes version. So at some point way back in the day, Major League Baseball decided that they weren't going to let teams just hoard players. And so obviously you have your big league roster, 26 guys, I think we're at now. And then you have what essentially works as a reserve list. And that's the rest of your 40-man roster. So to be on your 26-man roster, you have to be on your 40-man roster. And there's some in-season stuff that if a guy gets hurt and gets put on the 60-day injured list, then you get another spot. But at the end of the season, in the off season, the players become free agents. They leave your 40-man roster. And then you have to now add a new wave of players. So the way that it works is if you were drafted out of college or signed at 19 or older, is you're exempt from the Rule 5 draft for 3 seasons. So guys that were drafted this year out of college would have to be protected from the Rule 5 draft for the first time in December of 2026.
Mm-hmm.
If you were drafted out of high school or an international free agent this year, you would have to be protected from the Rule 5 draft for the first time in 2027. Now, you can be added to the 40-man roster before that. But if you get to the point where you are on a roster, you're not a free agent, and you've reached the end of your exemptions from being Rule 5 eligible, you are now eligible for this draft. Now, the big one is the Major League draft. So you have your 40-man big league roster, but then there's also reserve rosters for your AAA and AA teams, which I think are 35 and 30. They're never really made public, but you put guys on your 40-man reserve roster, you put guys on your AAA roster, your AA roster, and then if they're not there and they're eligible for the draft, they can be drafted in the Major League phase or the AAA phase, the AA phase. And basically what it does is it allows other teams to take players out of organizations for a small amount that aren't getting an opportunity in the organization that they are a member of, per se.
Okay.
So that's the Rule 5 draft kind of in a nutshell. And the Twins, as well as other teams, have struck gold in this, giving guys opportunities that other organizations weren't. But really, that's kind of how it works. So right now, we're looking at the 2020 college draftees having to be added to be protected from this draft, and the 2019 high school draftees or international free agents being added to be protected from this draft.
Shockingly clear explanation from you, Jeremy. That was great. Thank you. So okay, so that's kind of some level setting on the process, why it exists. So I guess the headline is right, like to stop organizations hoarding talent and prospects. So what does it look like? Let's say I'm a team, I'm picking in the Rule 5 draft, I take a guy, he moves onto my 40-man roster. What does the process look like from there? Because there are some kind of wrinkles and complications, right, about keeping them on the roster for the entire season, or else what happens?
Correct. So if my team exposes a guy in the Rule 5 draft and your team drafts him, not only does he go onto the 40-man roster, but he has to actually stay on the 26-man roster for the season or be offered back. First put through waivers, and then if he clears waiver, offered back to his original organization. So I think the price is like $50,000. So you take my guy as a reward, I get $50,000, which is a really small amount of money, but in real life, that's a ton of money.
Right.
And so
nothing in baseball, though.
Not in baseball, no. And so then you keep them on your roster. Now, there are some things that can make it not so hard, right? If they go on the injured list and the whole season passes, they got to make it like 90 days on the active roster before they become really yours. But if you decide, we go through spring training, he's not going to make your 26-man roster, you put him on waivers. Another team could take him, or another team could claim him off waivers, still under the same rules. If he clears waivers, then he could come be offered back to my organization. If I take him back, then I have to return, I think it's half the money, 25 grand to you.
Okay.
And then he's back in my organization, not on the 40 man unless I add him, and not on the 26 man unless I add him. He just is back in that minor league system. If at the end of the season he's Rule 5 eligible still and still under contract, because you get basically 7 full seasons of minor league service before you hit minor league free agency, he would be eligible for the Rule 5 draft the next year, unless he's been added to the 40 man before that.
Got it. Makes sense. And as always, producer Theo coming through with the MVP tidbits in the chat, saying there's been some iteration of the Rule 5 draft dating back to 1920. Definitely longer than I knew about or expected. So I guess last question before we start tackling orgs and like who they might protect. How kind of common is it that teams gain or lose kind of significant contributors through the Rule 5 draft? And like, I guess how common is it even that organizations make a pick during the Rule 5 draft, like at all?
Right. So a lot of teams will pass.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm guessing there'll probably be 15, 16 to 20 picks. Some years are stronger than others. They actually, I mean, I feel like when I say a handful of years back, it was much more than that, but they changed the exceptions to make more guys to speed up the timeline.
Mhm.
At this point now, because there's less time, and with these guys, especially the college guys being 2020 draftees, and then there wasn't the season, you might see where guys kind of slip through, right? There's been some great ones. Johan Santana jumps to mind as a twin selection who
Mhm.
turned out to be absolutely dominant Cy Young winner. Ryan Presley was drafted from the Red Sox organization into the Twins organization and then traded to the Astros, where he's become dominant. Theo points out Roberto Clemente being the biggest Rule 5 pick in history.
Not bad.
And so it's guys like that. Now in the 50s, it was a little bit different because there wasn't, all the notoriety and all the
Mhm.
publicity. But, as far as being a star, it's rare, but you find guys to serve a purpose. Was Santander, or I feel like the Orioles struck gold with one of their outfielders a handful of years ago. I'm guessing Theo will be able to find that
Well,
soon.
didn't they take Tyler Wells also from the Twins in the Rule
Yep.
5 draft?
And so he was a really good choice. But then you'll get times where it's like, oh yeah, made the selection, and then within weeks it's like gone.
Yep.
There was one last year, and I don't remember the two teams involved, but a player that was drafted out of I think, was it the Naval Academy, or was drafted out of academy that really hadn't put in the baseball service because he was completing the other service. I want to say the Red Sox. Noah Song was the player's name. And
Okay.
so he hadn't really played much in the minors. I think it was maybe Red Sox Phillies that this happened with. And so he was drafted in the Rule 5 draft thinking, maybe we can develop him. It didn't work out. He ended up back in the I think it's the Phillies took him from the Red Sox, or maybe vice versa, but ended back in the original organization. Theo says, yeah, Santander was a Rule 5 pick. So there's names that you've heard of, and you're like, oh, I didn't realize that.
Yep. For sure.
Because it becomes pretty common. Now, the other thing that I like to point out is that when you sign a minor league free agent prior to the Rule 5 draft, he's Rule 5 eligible.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't understand why anybody announces any minor league deals before the Rule 5 draft. The Twins signed R.A. Dickey to a minor league deal a handful of years ago, taken in the Rule 5 draft.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, the pause of things from now until the end of the winter meetings should really be a thing. Will somebody drafted in the Rule 5 draft make an impact this year? I would bet, yeah. Right. So that's kind of how things work. It's fun. It's fun to pay attention to. JJ Cooper, Baseball America, is maybe the biggest fan of the Rule 5 draft in the history of the world. And that's super cool, because if you're into drafts or you're into the off season, it just gives you something that you can circle on the calendar. I would guess I've listened to the Rule 5 draft every single year since I had internet, and it was on. It's just like it's just vocals. The Twins pick 21st, they pass. And it's like, okay, no, next one. And so it's something for geeks like myself to pass some time on. I think it's on a Thursday morning in December. What else are you going to do on a Thursday morning?
Yep. P.S. Also agree with producer Theo who points out that your definition of a handful is loose. R.A. Dickey, 14 years ago, pal.
Yeah. Handful. I was in my mid-20s. It's fine.
Okay. Okay. All right. Cool. So that's some background, some context. Now let's kind of dig into. We're going to go org by org. We're going to talk about some of the prospects that might be under consideration. So here's how we're going to do this, and you can tell me if you think this kind of setup is going to work. There's still time for organizations to add prospects to their 40-man rosters, right? So we're going to talk today about like some of the most notable possibilities for each organization. And I feel like they are divided into two player types. One player type is what I would call like notable prospects from an organization. So Emmanuel Rodriguez is a great example. He is a lock to be added to the 40-man roster for the Twins. The other player type I'm going to call like less notable prospects, but have a track record of strong performance in the upper minors, right? Such that a bad team like the Oakland Athletics might see them and say, ooh, that could be a guy that could make an impact for our big league team this year, potentially. Let's take a swing. So that's kind of the two player types that we're going to focus on here. For each org, we'll go through and we'll start by highlighting guys who are listed in their top 30s. We'll use Pipeline for this exercise just for the sake of some consistency. And then we'll kind of highlight some other possibilities, guys that weren't listed as a top 30 prospect for that organization to ensure we kind of capture that, class of prospects that's like good performers in the upper minors. So we're going to go alphabetical today. Start with the Brewers, and let's start with some names. I think we got one shoe in here, right? Catcher Jefferson Cuero. We have talked about him. Actually, talked about him a bunch last week. He's their number 2 prospect on Pipeline. Don't know if I agree with that, but absolutely a consensus top 100 prospect. He is a lock. Not worth really talking much more about. I'm going to, Jeremy, read you some numbers for a couple more guys in the Brewers top 30, and I want your expert assessment on whether you think they are kind of locks, absolutely no way they get added, or somewhere on the bubble in the middle, and what your thoughts are. So these two guys we're going to talk about. Firstly, right-handed pitcher Bradley Blaylock. He is the Brewers' number 17 prospect overall, according to MLB Pipeline. Had some injury concerns here. I believe he was originally drafted by the Red Sox organization. Starting pitcher who spent his time with the Brewers in 2023 at High A. Throughout his kind of entire minor league career, 3.77 ERA and 160 innings pitched, 164 Ks. Most of his time has been logged as a starter, but returning from injury, good stuff, but not a ton of innings, only at High A. What are your thoughts on Blaylock?
So he's interesting because of kind of all the things that you mentioned. The other thing that really should be noted is if you're trying to decide on protecting a guy for your team, he doesn't have to be a Major League Baseball player at that point, right? If I'm trying to decide if I want to take a guy from your team, I have to determine that, I think there's a chance he could be a contributor to my Major League Baseball team this year.
Yep.
So in my opinion, the teams are a little, if there's a bubble guy, they can be a little more, they can play with a little more risk, because not only would you have to have the guy drafted that may not get drafted, but he'd also have to stick on that big league roster. And so I would err on Blaylock's side, where I think that the Brewers would add him because there's the potential there, and they may add him because there's the potential there. But what probably outweighs that is, I don't know that there's a lot of teams saying Bradley Blaylock is a Major League Baseball player right now.
For sure.
There might be some teams, like I like to throw out the A's, that could take a flyer on him and say, yeah, we could play him in low leverage situations because we have about 140 opportunities a year to play him in a game that's low leverage, and he could turn into something.
Yep.
But I probably would put him on the bubble, but lean towards not adding him.
Yep. It makes sense. I think I agree with that. The other guy that we'll highlight from the Brewers top 30, again, pipeline rankings have not been updated since post draft, so feel free to disagree with the rankings. 26th overall prospect infielder Freddie Zamora, 2020 pick out of Miami. He's now 25. 5'10", 190 pounds, spent most of his career as a pro at shortstop. Spent 2022 or 2023, excuse me, at Double A for the Brewers. Hit 255, 352, 361 with a 713 OBP. Strong defense, very versatile, can kind of play anywhere on the dirt. A little bit of pop, not a lot. Good on-base percentage, but kind of a defense-first utility, but the ball in play type infielder for the Brewers. What are your thoughts on Zamora?
I think he maybe checks a few more boxes as far as how you could fit on a team. If you could be a defensive replacement, you take that. If you can be a pinch runner, you could take that. With 26-man roster, there's more opportunity. I'm just not sure that he's the level of prospect that you would take to stick. And so I would have him on the bubble, but even less likely than Blaylock, because I think the upside's maybe a little bit different. I just don't know. I don't think the Brewers, especially with their plethora of prospects, that they would say, yeah, we got to make sure we keep him, because you look around, you're like, we got some guys that could do that if we do lose him. And 40-man roster spots are valuable because these guys have to stay on the roster for so long. And you want to make room for free agents. So you really then have to choose him over one of your existing guys that are a little bit higher up in the pecking order. So I would also say bubble at best, but would lean no.
Yep. I think I'd agree with that. Let's whip through some other Brewers possibilities. These guys fall under the category of like higher level minors, lesser known prospects. Again, like the Brewer system is super loaded, so that's not necessarily a slight on these guys. We'll just do some kind of headlines for these guys because I think outside of Cuero, Blaylock and Zamora are definitely the most likely guys for the Brewers. They have maybe less interesting decisions than the Cubs and the Twins do ahead of them. So other possibilities there. Left-handed pitcher Adam Seminaris, a starter with kind of solid underlying metrics, not necessarily good results in 2023. He ended the season at AAA, walks too many guys. A couple of guys who they have in the AFL right now, right-handed pitcher Justin Yeager, a reliever, big strikeout numbers, but walks a gazillion guys. Or did in 2023. Also, Joseph Hernandez, another right-handed pitcher, a starter at high A, only a 16.3 K percentage and a 14.4 walk percentage. Also, is pitching in the AFL at the moment. And then last guy I'd highlight is right-handed pitcher Evan McKendry, kind of a middling, solid but not spectacular AAA starter. So those are four kind of other possibilities for the Brewers. Jeremy, don't want to assume, but my thought would be that none of those guys really do it for you in terms of potential ads for the 40-man.
Right. That's how I would lean. However, I do think that relief pitchers that if they have one specific tool that
Mm.
teams are looking for, end up being kind of the surprise picks because you can Cole Sands a guy into the bullpen, right? Bullpen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not sure which one of those four. The thing that was interesting to me was Hernandez in the AFL. I know you mentioned before the walk rates
Mm-hmm.
with the the ABS system, that maybe
Yep.
those walk rates are higher than they should be.
Yep.
So really it would just come down to team preference. Lefties, there's a little more value there. If you can get a lefty starter, the guy or a swingman type that just could fit. None of those four to me, if I was running an organization, would be like, yep, we got to get that guy. But it wouldn't shock me if the Brewers are like, hey, we really like this guy based on what we've seen. Of course, throwing Blaylock into that mix, Blaylock would be the top one of those.
For sure.
And when the Brewers made the trade for Blaylock at the deadline, knowing that he was going to be a 40-man ad or potential 40-man ad, makes him also a little bit more intriguing from that perspective. I just don't think he sticks, having never pitched a double-A or higher.
Yep. Yep. I think I would agree with that. I think headlines for the Brewers, maybe not like a ton of super interesting decisions, despite having an incredibly strong system. But I guess from the organizational perspective, that's what you want, is not to have to make a ton of tough decisions ahead of Rule 5 exposure. So let's move on to the Cubs. Cubs do have some interesting decisions ahead here, and we'll kind of chop these up a little bit. And we'll kind of speed through some of them, and then we'll pause to talk about a few others. So first guy, we're going to start with the guys on the top 30 list first. Number 12, right-handed pitcher Michael Arias. Pitched at single A and high A. I don't know that we want to spend a ton of time on him. His stuff is really good, really electric. But the performance is pretty uneven, and he's at the lower minors. I don't know if there's a ton of likelihood that an org takes a flyer on him.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
So here's the thing with that top, like when you said 2 tiers, for me that top tier is guys with like actual trade value,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if you could take a guy with actual trade value and somehow keep him on your roster and not totally destroy his development, you've just done a good thing for your organization.
Yep.
And Arias is kind of in that area for the Cubs. The other thing that is intriguing when you get international free agents, and this is going to get way into the weeds here, but when you get international guys, their professional service time clock starts earlier towards Rule 5, but
Mm-hmm.
their service time clock, where you put in professional seasons, starts later.
Okay.
Because the Dominican League and anything that starts later, if you're not playing, those seasons don't count. And so if you get to the point where you're out of options before you've had 5 full years of experience, you get a 4th year.
Mm-hmm.
So you can basically, as an organization, say, we're going to add Arias to our roster this year. It's going to be his first option year. He's going to be at high A. And then next year, if he's still in the spot, we can keep him. And then the next year, and then at the end of the day, he would get that 4th option year. And that's the type of player that I think teams are more likely to add. Not that they're afraid he's going to get selected.
Yep.
But if we add him, we can just take that one spot. We can continue to develop him. If it doesn't pan out a year from now, DFA'd, right?
Yep.
And so you kind of have to make those choices a little bit earlier on these guys, and there's still a lot of development. I think Arias was he like 1 in 10 this year. Like it wasn't good.
Yeah, it wasn't pretty.
So, but at the same time, if another team gets a hold of him, can phantom DL him, get him, limp him through the year where he gets some stuff, and then next year, I just think there's more opportunities for a player like him to be added if there's room on your roster.
Yep. Definitely makes sense. So next, out of the Cubs' top 30 guys, is actually a guy they already added. So I'm going to ask you about this in just a second here. Luis Vasquez, their 21st overall prospect, a shortstop, originally out of PR, drafted in the 14th round, spent the year or most of the year for the Cubs, or split actually between Double A and Triple A. In 2023, he put up some really nice numbers, man. In Triple A, Iowa hit 257, 381, 428. Good for an 809 OPS as a 24-year-old shortstop, 6 feet, 165. So let me ask you this, because this is also relevant to the Twins too. The Cubs already added Vasquez because he would have been a minor league free agent, and you kind of made mention of that previously. But why do orgs have to add these guys who are eligible for minor league free agency and not just add everyone who they're going to add all at once?
So yeah, so in Vasquez's case, he was going to be a free agent and not be Cubs property 5 days after the World Series. And so in his case, because I mean, he's been Rule 5 eligible before to get to this point. The Cubs wanted him to remain in the organization. They signed him to a minor league deal, lost him in the Rule 5 draft. So to bypass that, they just say, hey, we're going to put you on the 40. As a guy with Double A and Triple A experience, he's going to already provide almost major league depth. And I think that's one that you want to at least kind of reap the benefits of having developed a guy.
For sure.
And so good on them for getting that done and beating other teams to the punch. Because I'm guessing players like this and like the ones we'll talk about, they're going to be in demand for other teams as minor league free agents, major league free agents, and potentially Rule 5 guys. And so the organization that knows them the best just beats the other teams to the punch, and you add them to the 40-man.
For sure. Vasquez, just some other numbers on him across both levels in 2023. 817 OPS, 361 on base percentage, 20 home runs, 10 steals. There's a lot to like there, man. Makes a ton of sense. Okay, let's whip through some of these other guys. Not going to talk about him, but right-handed pitcher Porter Hodge. He is 26th overall prospect, Double A starting pitcher, 103 Ks and 80 innings of work, but walked a lot of guys. 367 FIP. He's interesting.
Yep, I'd say that.
Yeah, Pablo Aliendo, a catcher, 27th overall prospect. And now his page has just crashed for me as I get ready to read some of his 2023 numbers. We'll come back to him in a second. He's definitely an interesting potential add for the Cubs. Outside of their top 30, there are another couple of guys to kind of mention. Left-handed pitcher Bailey Horn is one. Right-handed pitcher Cole Franklin, nephew of Ryan Franklin. Don't see a ton of possibility there. Doesn't really have a super effective breaking pitch. But here's the guy who I wanted to ask you about most of all on the Cubs list. So I was doing research for this and stumbled across Jonathan Perlaza, right? Who is a 24-year-old outfielder, switch hitter, throws right-handed, 5'9", 170. So he's like a diminutive dude. I'm just going to share with you some of his 2023 numbers. He spent the whole season at AAA, 121 games. He hit 284, 389, 534 for a 130 WRC plus, 23 home runs, 13 stolen bases, walked 14% of the time, and struck out under 22% of the time. And this is a guy who was not ranked in the Cubs top 30 on Pipeline, and also was not ranked in the Cubs top 52 on Fangraphs in their last update. what are your? I mean, those numbers are insane. Surely he is a guy, given that he's had a full season at AAA with really insane production, that you would have to strongly consider adding here.
Yeah, so I mean, as you're talking about it, I'm like, okay, let me pull him up and see where he kind of fits in the organization, and he's not even on like the roster resource page, which is weird. Um, but it would be, for me, it would be a hard sell to call anybody that doesn't fit in the top 30 someone that you're going to add, because then I'm like, wait, maybe he was just a minor league free agent and on their roster. He doesn't appear to be that either. So there's something about him, right? That's people aren't liking. Is it the strikeouts?
Nope.
He seemed to have a really good year and not get mentioned at all.
Here's the
So
thing. Let me just go back in time, right? And talk you through some of his numbers historically. 2019 at A ball, WRC plus 100. Fine, that's nothing to write home about. 2021 at high A, WRC plus is 123. 2022 entire season at Double A, his WRC plus is 122. 2023 entire season at Triple A, his WRC is plus is 130. So this is a guy who has been between 20 and 30% better than an average hitter at every level he's played at. He's a weird player type. He's hard to categorize. Like he's like a kind of like small, like Altuve type build.
he's a minor league free agent.
Yeah. Well,
So he's not. He didn't get added. He's free for anybody right now.
shocking.
Baseball America had him on the list yesterday because I'm like, that's interesting. But yeah, that would be.
That surprises me.
He's on the list. His name's right ahead of on the list, right before Steven Gonsalves, and 2 spots above Nick Birdie.
Well,
As a matter of fact.
wow,
So,
Nick Birdie.
but yeah, but he would be an interesting add as a minor league free agent, right?
100%.
And you have guys that are AAA bound, and maybe I'm assuming he's going to be the type of guy that's just looking for the right opportunity, and I think that's going to be interesting enough there for the Cubs, for anybody.
For sure. Great numbers. Pablo Aliendo, page pop real quick before we move to the Twins. Catcher, 26th overall prospect of the Cubs per MLB Pipeline, 6 foot, 170 as a 22-year-old in Double A, 231, 332, 790 OPS, 16 home runs. So got some pop. He's another potential interesting name to watch for the Cubs.
I think you see catchers get drafted because they can be the backup, right? And so I think you add a guy like that as a AAA guy, have that third catcher on your 40-man. I believe the Cubs have 2 right now, because another team could just say, hey, you know what? We're looking for a strong defensive catcher. We're going to draft this guy. He's going to be on our roster. In the event that our main guy that's going to play 4 to 5 to 6 days a week goes down, we have another option as a minor league guy to be the stopgap. So I would think when you have a strong catcher, you add him because you don't want to lose him, and that would be the reason that you add that guy.
All right, that's the Cubs. I think more so than the Brewers, have some interesting decisions and choices ahead. Let's finish up with the Twins. So same situation as the Cubs with Vasquez, in that they did have 2 players who were becoming or going to become minor league free agents. Both were added to the 40-man roster. That's Junior Severino and Jair Camargo. Let's start with Severino. Jeremy, what are your thoughts? I feel like people were on the fence about whether he might be added. Is that a surprise to you? What do you see as his kind of role in 2024? And give us a little background on Severino, because he had a really interesting 2023 season.
Well, he had a really interesting way back in 2017. He signs with the Braves.
Braves, right? Yep.
And then the Braves are basically stripped of all these players. So he plays for the Braves in 2017 in the Gulf Coast League. So he comes stateside at 17, which is impressive. But then there was some things found to be done illegally, and as a free agent, gets to keep a signing bonus, but basically hits free agency again and signs with the Twins. So he was a pretty high-profile prospect.
Yep.
Goes to E-Town in 2018, where he hit 8 home runs in 49 games, 745 OPS. 2019 splits between it looks like he mostly played for Cedar Rapids and wasn't very good. 240, batted 244 with 636 OPS. 2020 never happens for him, right? And he's now kind of forgotten about because he comes back, doesn't really perform. Well, at this point, they flip-flop, right? So Fort Myers in 2021, he's batting 245, gets promoted to Cedar Rapids at 21 years old, has a 907 OPS in 35 games. And now it's like, wait a second, maybe this guy can be a guy. 2022 hits for more power, combines for 19 home runs. And now he's back on the radar. And then 2023 starts in Wichita and hits 24 bombs in 84 games, 925 OPS, ends in St. Paul, hitting more home runs, 11 home runs in 36 games, combined for 35 bombs. Playing first base, a little bit of second base, third base, right-handed power bat, strikes out all the time, right? Strikes out all the time, but also hits home runs. And so he's one of those players that he could have found a spot on a major league team. He wasn't ever going to get drafted in the 5 because he was going to be a minor league free agent until someone signed him to be on their 40-man. And the Twins, like the Cubs did with Vasquez, just were like, you know what, this guy has value. We're going to add him. And he'll be in St. Paul next year, being a right-handed power bat in the corners, and could be added at any time. And so I think that's a really smart move. Like when I saw that, it wasn't surprising at all. Like, oh yeah, Severino to the 40-man. That makes sense.
So let me ask you this.
Yep.
Let me ask you this. So I think Severino is actually a switch hitter, but he doesn't have his splits are really similar across the board, so it doesn't really make a difference. And it kind of tees up this question nicely, I think, right? So he walks an okay amount, 9.8% at AAA, strikes out like 36.6%. That's wild. Is there any way he breaks camp with the Twins as part of a first base platoon for a team who is reportedly cutting payroll in 2024? Is there any way he starts off in Minneapolis instead of St. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, there's a chance the bus crashes on the way home from Sarasota, and there's 8 guys that, all the first basemen are hurt. But otherwise, no, right? There's no reason to think that he fits there. He would be great to be in St. Paul and be a depth piece. Is he higher on the depth chart than Jose Miranda right now? I wouldn't think so. Are there other minor league guys that maybe could fill that role better? Yeah. Are there other Twins minor league guys that maybe could also fill that role? Probably. I would be shocked, barring significant injuries, that he has a chance to come right away. Is there a chance that he could make his debut this year? Sure. Is there a chance that he's a trade piece? That's also a possibility. So that's why you add guys, right? You add them if they can serve a specific purpose or if they have trade value. And I think Severino has that, and that's why you don't just let him walk for nothing.
For sure agree. The other impending minor league free agent they added is Jair Camargo, 24-year-old catcher, 5'10", 230. He's a big lad. Just want to detail a little bit of his 2023 numbers because he had a very interesting season. So he spent the entire year at St. Paul, right? 350-plus plate appearances, hit 259, 323, 503 slugging percentage. His ISO is 244. That's crazy. Slugged 21 home runs. Walked like 8% of the time. A lot of strikeouts. But he is a really interesting kind of development story for St. Paul this year. He had the second largest gain in exit velocity of any prospect in the minor leagues. So his average exit velocity jumped about 4 miles per hour in 2023, which is a lot. And that's also interesting because he is 24, I think. He's 24, and I think a lot of the research, not an expert here, but I think a lot of the research points to exit velocity kind of flattening out after 22 or past age 22. So mashed, started to hit the ball harder in 2023. I think it's fair to say that the Twins were like unusually healthy at catcher in 2023, or he would have gotten some run as a backup if Jeffers or Vasquez has spent any time on the injured list. But Camargo added, same question. Any chance he plays a role with the Twins in 2023 or 2024? Excuse me. And was this add a surprise to you?
Yes, I believe he could play a role. No, again, not a surprise. From the perspective of this is where he deserves to be on a 40-man roster. Kind of the surprise in that the Twins have been really, in my opinion, reluctant to house that third catcher on the 40-man, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've had their two guys, and then they get depth. They get 4A talent, right? They go sign guys that are like, oh yeah, Tony Walters. He has some major league experience.
Yep.
We're going to put him in AAA as that depth piece. So surprising in that they're going to use a third 40-man spot for a catcher. He's going to be the third catcher, right? Mm-hmm. So if Jeffers goes down, he comes up. If Vasquez goes down, he comes up. And then they'll probably add a, another depth piece, but I think they kind of have that already. So no, that not a surprise because I think he deserved it, and he would have been another type of player that someone would have wanted on their roster and would have given him a 40-man spot prior to the Rule 5 draft because he would have got taken. And so, he wouldn't have got taken because he would have been a minor league free agent, but had he been a minor league player, someone would have put him to put on their 26. And so, good on the Twins again for recognizing that and adding him. And it does add a little less intrigue because there's going to be 2 less spots.
Yep.
But I think those 2 guys were going to get spots anyway.
For sure agree. Okay, so the rest of the Twins crew, I feel like this is fairly easy to divide into no-brainers and the rest. I think that it's safe to say the no-brainers are Emmanuel Rodriguez and Austin Martin. We talk about Erod a lot, so we're not going to talk about him now. I'm curious for your thoughts on Martin. Again, without being kind of clickbaity here, especially considering a potentially reduced payroll for the Twins in 24. What role do you expect Martin to have? Any chance he is at least a bit part center fielder from close to the beginning of the season?
I would be surprised if it was early.
Mm-hmm.
I think you roll him out in AAA and just see how he does. But I think the Twins have to go into the season with a solution to center field.
Sure.
And if that solution is we think Buxton can do it 120 times, then maybe Martin does figure in more prominently than what I would suggest.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any chance that Kepler could play center again? I don't know. I don't think Taylor comes back. I don't think they break the bank for anybody. Is maybe Willie Castro is their backup center fielder. Is that you'd make a face like something stinks, but is that crazy?
Yes. Is it crazy? No. Is it like a great plan going into the season? I don't think so. I think they would prefer Willie Castro to be like option number 3 and Austin Martin to be option number 4, with Buxton obviously being option 1 and question mark being option number 2 to be
Gordon
determined.
Is option number 2. Does that work? Nick Gordon is option number 2?
No, because I think him and Castro are about the same.
Yeah, I would agree. But I think that's what you do in spring training, right? I don't think if you're gonna not add payroll and you think Buxton can do it, but I also think that's not a plan that the Twins have right now,
For
right?
sure.
If it's March, maybe not March, but if it's mid-February and you don't have a solution to center field, there's going to be some scrap heap type center fielder that you can either get or get pretty cheaply in a trade like Michael A. Taylor. Right? That didn't cost the Twins much, and that worked out really well for them.
Yep.
I think those types of guys are all over the place. So um, if Austin Martin is the number 2 option or an early season option, he either did something over the winter that totally took them by surprise that made them the hugest believers, or something went really, really wrong for the Twins.
Fair enough. Although I will say, he put up his on base skills make me less concerned about him being in the mix. Like I think his on base percentage, obviously he was injured a lot in 23, but 384 on base percentage, like he walks and gets hit by pitches so much that to me, if the role is like somewhat limited, at least gives a floor for being a pain in the butt because he's a great athlete, he's a good runner, he's going to steal bases, he's going to be a nuisance. So interested to see how he shakes out.
I'm okay with people thinking that I don't like Emmanuel Rodriguez, because I have parts where I don't love about Emmanuel Rodriguez. When the rumor that the Twins were looking to trade Jose Barrios was a thing, and there was connections to the Blue Jays,
Mm-hmm.
I was beating the "it's got to be Austin Martin" drum
That was
harder
their
than
guy.
anybody. And there were so many people saying they're not going to trade Austin Martin. They'll trade so many other players,
Mm-hmm.
but they won't trade Austin Martin. Martin didn't really develop the power. The hit tool's not been as great, but I mean, I'm still a believer that Austin Martin's a Major League Baseball player.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think you can follow this season with expectations and say, yeah, Austin Martin's going to be the center fielder, because I've seen a team try that with trading Denard Span, trading Ben Revere. Here you go, Aaron Hicks, and that didn't go very well. And Austin Martin is not as ready as Aaron Hicks was at that time, and that turned out really poorly.
Yep, sure did. Sure did. Okay, let's whip through some of these other Twins guys, then we will get ready to wrap up. So, other possibilities here, in no particular order. Jose Salas, older brother of Ethan Salas, who came to the Twins in the Pablo Lopez Luis Ariz trade. He had a terrible season in
Yeah, it was god awful.
2023.
It was the worst.
Aaron Sabato, who is um, accumulating OPS in the most Aaron Sabato way in the AFL by only hitting home runs and nothing else. He's a 2020 draft guy. Michael Hellman is kind of like a utility infield type who his 23 season was kind of ruined by injuries. I actually think if he had been healthy, he might have been a really interesting pick up for another organization. Ricardo Olivar, we've talked about a decent amount on the show. The weird hybrid of catcher, center fielder, who spent all of last season in Fort Myers. Great production, but really still in kind of the lower levels of the minors. And then Anthony Prado, who producer Theo wrote a great profile of in the middle of this season, who wasn't really doing a ton at Wichita, and then came up to St. Paul and just absolutely destroyed everything for the rest of the season. Had an incredible end of his 2023 season. Any of these other kind of possibilities float your boat or strike you as someone they might consider adding?
Yeah, I could see Prado being added.
Yeah.
I could see Prado not being added and getting drafted too. I mean, that maybe is more likely. The other thing too, and I spent more time looking at the Brewers and Cubs list than the Twins list.
Mm-hmm.
The Twins always seem to add a pitcher that nobody saw coming. I don't know who that pitcher might be this year, but I could totally see them adding a pitcher and being like, oh, They did it with Gibson Long, and then they traded him. They did it with Ober. They just always seem to add somebody because pitching's harder to find.
Yep.
And there's value in that. So I don't know which pitcher it might be, but if a pitcher shows up on that list, I might just be like, yeah, well, you gotta have him.
Gibson Long, who looked great in his major league debut with the Tigers on the tail end of 2023, just to stamp the Prado case. AAA numbers in 232 at-bats: 302, 452, 539, 991 OPS, 10 home runs, 10 stolen bases. CHS Field is super offensively friendly, and the International League with the automated strike zone as a whole, offense was up a ton, but that is still a mighty impressive offensive output for Prado. He's definitely an interesting candidate for sure. Versatile, as producer Theo points out in the chat. So we will see. Jeremy, anyone else for the Twins strike you as interesting before we wrap up here, or someone you would consider ad worthy?
Deshaun Kiersey was a name that was kind of on my list. I think he was pretty bad in AAA after he got promoted, which maybe hurts things. He's a little bit older. Speed and defense, though, are the two things that seem to get drafted.
Yep.
So if a team's looking for a fourth outfielder type, he could be an ad. And then I just pulled up Gleeman's athletic article to see, because I knew that he had written on it, and he only lists three pitchers, Cody Lawyerson, Miguel Rodriguez, and John Stankiewicz are the only guys on his list that are pitchers. Rodriguez, I think, was closing for the Colonels and got promoted. Lawyerson's kind of at those higher levels. Stankiewicz was a 2020 undrafted guy, I think.
Yep.
But if one of those names were to get added, I would be like, that makes sense. I think they're all more in the reliever vein, which I think is less likely to be the selection. But the Twins do have some options. But at the end of the day, they probably go pretty standard with Erod and Martin, and then move on.
Right on, man. Well, we're going to have answers soon enough, and we will definitely circle back to kind of cover and hop into which guys were added for each organization. So excited for that. We are going to save listener questions. Thank you to folks who sent them in, but we're running a little long today, so we will save listener questions. We'll keep them on here for our next episode. Really appreciate folks for sending them in. Want to close, as always, with thank yous. Thank you guys for tuning in. We had our most downloaded and listened to episode last time around, episode 11. So super appreciate you guys for giving us a try, spreading the word. Ways you can support the show: download episodes, retweet the show, leave us positive feedback on your podcast platform of choice. As always, big thank you to producer Theo for keeping things moving and smooth behind the scenes. We will be back with another episode next week, and a couple of directions we might go. We might start doing some deep dives into each org's farm system. So we're planning on having a guest for each organization who is a real, true expert on each farm system, kind of speak to strengths, weaknesses, specific guys, and questions you might have on them. Or we might be reacting to news. So if there are trades, other relevant news, we will absolutely be sure to cover that. So tune back in for next week. As always, thank you guys for supporting the show. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.